An artist's portfolio is more than paper and paint. It's their soul made visible. For 17-year-old Amara Smith, it was her ticket to a future she'd spent her life dreaming of. But on a Tuesday morning at Dulles International Airport, that future was ripped apart not by accident, but by choice. A TSA agent cloaked in the authority of his uniform decided her art was a threat. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the quiet, devastated teenager on the other side of the glass was the daughter of the newest and arguably most powerful justice on the Supreme Court. This isn't just a story about a security check gone wrong. It's about the collision of power prejudice and the fierce, unyielding love of a mother pushed to her absolute limit. The air in Dulles International Airport, IAD, hummed with the controlled chaos of 1,000 intersecting journeys. For Amara Smith, it was the overture to the most important performance of her young life. Clutched in her hands was a large black leather portfolio, its weight both a physical burden and a comforting anchor. Inside lay a year of her life painstakingly rendered in charcoal ink and mixed media. It was her application to the Rhode Island School of Design's summer intensive program, the final physical submission. Amara was a study in contrasts. At 17, she possessed a quiet, observant nature that belied the explosive, vibrant worlds she created on paper. Her art was her voice, loud and unapologetic. The centerpiece of her portfolio, the one she'd bled her soul into, was a triptych titled Anatomy of a Whisper. It was a complex piece exploring the way rumors and stereotypes could dissect a person's identity. It used layers of translucent vellum sketches of anatomical hearts and brains, and crucially, a fine tracery of metallic inks that caught the light like fractured constellations. It was beautiful, intricate, and, to the wrong eyes, dangerously ambiguous. She placed her backpack and shoes into a gray bin, then hesitated with the portfolio. "Excuse me," she said to the nearest TSA agent, a harried-looking woman. "This is my art portfolio. It's very fragile. Can I have it hand-checked?" The woman waved her toward a different line. "Special inspection over there." Over there was the domain of Agent Ron Kowalski. He was a man in his late 40s with a permanently skeptical squint and a military-style buzz cut that did little to soften his hardened features. He carried the weary authority of someone who had seen it all and was impressed by none of it. He took the portfolio from Amara, without a word, his grip a little too tight on the worn leather. "What is this?" he asked, his voice flat. "It's my art portfolio." Amara repeated, her own voice smaller now. "For a college application. It's very delicate." Kowalski grunted and laid it on the stainless steel table with a thud that made Amara wince. He unzipped it. The first piece was a series of charcoal portraits, raw and emotive. He flipped through them dismissively. Then he reached the triptych. He paused, pulling out the first panel of Anatomy of a Whisper. He held it up to the fluorescent lights, his eyes narrowing at the metallic ink. "What are these?" He tapped a finger on the intricate lines depicting a nervous system. It's metallic ink, for effect." "Uh-huh." He pulled out the second panel, this one heavier, with layered paper and clippings from newspapers. He ran a gloved finger over the surface. "Looks like a map. What are you mapping?" "It's not a map, sir. It's an art piece. It's abstract." Amara's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't a hand check. It was an interrogation. "Doesn't look abstract to me," Kowalski said, his tone hardening. He pulled out the third and final panel, the most complex of the three. It incorporated thin, woven copper wire to represent the cage of public opinion. Kowalski's eyes locked onto the wire. He put the panel down and looked at Amara, a flicker of something triumphant and ugly in his eyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to test these for residue." "Test them for what?" "It's just paper and ink and a little bit of craft wire." Panic was starting to fray the edges of her composure. "You can't. You'll ruin it." "I can and I will, ma'am. It's my job to ensure the safety of this airport." He gestured to a colleague. "Bring the kit." Amara looked around desperately. People in line averted their eyes, eager to not get involved. She saw a supervisor, a woman with a Diaz name tag, observing from a distance. "Please," Amara begged, turning back to Kowalski. "That piece is the cornerstone of my entire application. The deadline for submission is tomorrow. Can't you just look at it? You can see it's nothing." "I see suspicious materials," Kowalski said, his voice rising, enjoying the small audience he now commanded. He took out a chemical swab. "If it's nothing, then you have nothing to worry about." He didn't swab a discreet corner. He dragged the chemical-laden tip directly across the face of the first panel, smearing the delicate metallic ink and leaving a sickening yellow-brown streak. Amara gasped a sound of pure horror. He moved to the second piece, his movements deliberately slow, and repeated the process, tearing a small piece of the layered vellum. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. "Stop! You're destroying it!" Her cry only seemed to egg him on. He picked up the third panel, the one with the copper wire. "This is a prohibited item," he declared, though the wire was finer than a paper clip. He didn't just swab it. With a sharp, deliberate twist of his hands, he bent the panel in half. A sickening crack echoed in the sterile space as the mounting board snapped. The copper wires popped and unspooled. It was done. A year of work, a lifetime of dreams lay broken and defiled on a cold steel table. The triptych was ruined. Irreparably. Kowalski looked at the mess he'd made, then at the swabbing tool. He ran his test. It came back, of course, negative. "It's clean," he announced with a shrug, as if this exonerated him. He began shoving the violated artwork back into the portfolio. The broken panel wouldn't fit. He tried to force it, tearing the leather lining. Finally, he gave up and tossed the broken piece onto the conveyor belt next to her bin. "You can go." Amara stood, frozen tears streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to the smeared ink, the torn paper, the snapped board. It was a physical assault on a part of her soul. She looked at Kowalski, at his smug, indifferent face, and a wave of utter helplessness washed over her. She shakily gathered her belongings, her hands trembling so badly she could barely pick up the broken piece of her art. She stumbled away from the security checkpoint, past the averted eyes and sympathetic whispers, and collapsed onto the nearest bench. The hum of the airport was a deafening roar. Her future, so bright just 10 minutes ago, felt as broken as the board in her lap. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over her contacts. Dad. Mom. She pressed Mom. It was a long shot. Her mother was the busiest person she knew. But in that moment of complete devastation, she needed her mom. The phone rang once, twice, then a calm, measured voice answered. "Evelyn Smith." "Mom." Amara's voice broke on a sob. "Mom, something terrible happened." Justice Evelyn Smith's chambers in the Supreme Court building were a sanctuary of quiet intellectual rigor. Sunlight filtered through tall arched windows, illuminated shelves lined with leather-bound legal texts, and the faint scent of old paper and lemon polish hung in the air. Evelyn sat at her expansive mahogany desk, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing a draft opinion for a complex Fourth Amendment case. The language was precise, the arguments meticulously structured. Her world was one of order precedent and the dispassionate application of law. Her reputation forged over a 25-year career as a prosecutor, a judge on the D.C. Circuit, and now for the last 8 months a Supreme Court justice was built on a foundation of unshakable calm. In confirmation hearings, she'd been called the Iron Judge, impassive, analytical, and brilliant. She was the court's new center, a swing vote known for her measured, nuanced opinions that frustrated extremists on both sides. When her private cell phone buzzed, she glanced at the caller ID, Amara. A rare smile touched her lips. She had admonished her daughter not to call during chambers hours unless it was an emergency, a rule Amara, ever respectful of her mother's work, always followed. She answered, expecting a quick question about her flight. Evelyn Smith. The sound that came through the phone was not a quick question. It was a raw, hiccuping sob. Mom, something terrible happened. The cold, analytical world of Smith versus United States evaporated in an instant. The justice was gone, replaced entirely by the mother. Evelyn's posture straightened, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Amara, honey, what is it? Where are you? Are you hurt? I'm at the airport, Amara cried, her words tumbling out in a torrent of anguish. Dulles, the TSA, my portfolio. Mom, he destroyed it. He tore it apart. Evelyn listened, her blood turning to ice. Amara recounted the story, her voice thick with tears and disbelief. The hand-check Agent Kowalski's accusations, the chemical swabs that smeared her ink, and the final brutal act of snapping her triptych in half. He said it was for security, Amara choked out. But it was clean. He knew it was clean. He didn't care. He smiled, Mom. That last detail, he smiled, landed like a physical blow. In her mind, Evelyn saw it all, her talented, sensitive daughter standing alone and helpless as a man in a uniform systematically dismantled her most precious creation out of spite or prejudice or the petty thrill of wielding unchecked power. A primal, protective fury began to burn behind her calm facade. This wasn't about a broken object. This was an attack on her child. Okay, baby. Okay, Evelyn said, her voice a low, steady anchor in her daughter's storm. Listen to me. Are you safe right now? I'm on a bench. People are staring. I don't care about them. I care about you. Do not get on that airplane. Do you hear me? Stay right where you are. What was the agent's name? Kowalski, Amara whispered. His name tag said Kowalski. Kowalski. Evelyn repeated the name, committing it to memory. It sounded like grinding stone in her mind. And the supervisor? Diaz, I think. She just watched. Okay, Amara, I'm coming to you. It will take me about 45 minutes. Find a coffee shop past security, get a bottle of water, and just sit. Don't talk to anyone about this. I will handle it. Mom, my flight. The deadline. We will deal with the deadline, Evelyn said with a certainty that momentarily cut through Amara's panic. Right now, you are my only priority. I love you. I'm on my way. She ended the call and stood up, the draft opinion on her desk, seeming like a relic from another lifetime. The Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons' houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. Her daughter's papers and effects had just been unreasonably seized and destroyed. She walked to the door of her chambers and opened it. Her clerk, a brilliant young man named Ben, looked up in surprise. Justice Smith, is everything all right? No, Ben. Something has come up. A family emergency. she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Cancel my afternoon. Reschedule my meeting with Justice Morrison. Get me David Chen on the phone. Now." Ben's eyes widened. David Chen was not just any lawyer. He was a former top litigator at the Department of Justice, now in private practice, and a trusted friend of the Smith family for over a decade. He was the man you called when things went nuclear. As Ben scrambled to make the calls, Evelyn strode back to her desk, bypassing her judicial robes for her coat and purse. The public persona of Justice Smith, the thoughtful jurist, the balancing force on the nation's highest court, was in full retreat. The woman who walked out of the Supreme Court building and into the waiting black car was not thinking about legal precedent or constitutional theory. She was a mother on a mission fueled by a cold, precise rage that was far more terrifying than any loud outburst. The agent at the airport had broken her daughter's art. He had no idea he had just awakened the Iron Judge. The manager's office for TSA operations at Dulles was a cramped, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Supervisor Maria Diaz sat behind her metal desk, shuffling papers with a growing sense of dread. The initial report from Agent Kowalski was routine, a passenger with a suspicious item that required invasive screening but ultimately proved harmless. Annoying, but standard. Then came the call from the airport director's office. The passenger's mother was on her way. This was also not unheard of. What was unheard of was the identity of the mother. The passenger's mother is Supreme Court Justice Evelyn Smith. The director's assistant had said, her voice tight with panic. "She is en route. Her ETA is 10 minutes. The director wants you to handle this with the utmost discretion and sensitivity." Diaz's blood ran cold. She had seen the interaction from a distance. She had seen the girl crying. She had trusted Kowalski's judgment as she usually did. He was a veteran, thorough if a bit gruff. Now, gruff seemed like a catastrophic understatement. She had summoned Kowalski to the office. He slouched in a chair against the wall, projecting an air of defiant boredom. "What's the big deal?" he'd grumbled. "The girl had weird stuff in her bag. I followed protocol. It was clean. End of story." "Did you have to break the item, Ron?" Diaz asked, her voice sharp. "It had wires in it. It was a potential threat vector. I made a judgment call. And now her mother is coming here. Her mother is Justice Smith." Kowalski's smirk faltered for the first time. "The one from the news, the new one. The very same." Before he could process this, the door opened. A woman stood there, flanked by a grim-faced airport official. She was of average height, dressed in a simple but elegant dark pantsuit. She held no briefcase, no entourage of clerks. She didn't need them. Her presence alone sucked the air out of the room. It was Justice Evelyn Smith. Her eyes, the same intelligent, piercing eyes that had stared down senators during her confirmation, swept the room and landed on Diaz. "Supervisor Diaz." Evelyn's voice was quiet, almost unnervingly so. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to without having to be raised. "Yes, Justice Smith. Please come in." Diaz stood up, flustered. Evelyn ignored the invitation to sit. Her gaze shifted to the man slouched against the wall. "And you must be Agent Kowalski." Kowalski rattled, pushed himself to his feet. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn walked slowly towards him, her footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes boring into his. "Agent Kowalski, my daughter tells me that you inspected her art portfolio today." "Yes, ma'am. Standard procedure. The items inside." They raised some red flags. He was trying for his usual authoritative tone, but it cracked under the weight of her stare. "Red flags." Evelyn repeated the words, hanging in the air like an indictment. Tell me, what specific training have you received that allows you to differentiate between metallic ink used by an artist and a chemical threat? Well, we're trained to identify anomalies. That was not my question. Evelyn cut him off, her voice dropping another degree colder. I asked about your specific training in art supplies. Have you ever been to the National Gallery of Art Agent Kowalski? Have you seen the works of Klimt, who used gold leaf, or contemporary artists who use mixed media? Or do you simply classify anything you don't personally understand as an anomaly? He stammered. It's not about understanding art. It's about security protocols. Let's talk about protocols then. Evelyn continued, circling him slowly like a predator sizing up its prey. Show me the specific TSA directive that instructs an agent to purposefully snap a piece of artwork in half after it has already been deemed non-threatening by a chemical swab. Diaz jumped in. Justice Smith, Agent Kowalski made a field judgment. Evelyn held up a hand, silencing her without even a glance. Her focus was entirely on Kowalski. My daughter, a 17-year-old girl, informed you that the portfolio was for a college application. She informed you it was fragile. She pleaded with you. And according to her, you responded not just by damaging her work, but by destroying it, deliberately. You broke her project in two. Is this an accurate account? Kowalski's face was slick with sweat. The defiant posture was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of his situation. The piece had wires. It could have been a teenager's art project, which is precisely what it was, Evelyn countered. An object you destroyed out of what I can only surmise was a profound ignorance, a deep-seated prejudice, or a pathetic desire to exercise power over a child. Which was it, Agent Kowalski? Or was it a combination of all three? The room was utterly silent. Diaz looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The airport official was pretending to be a statue. Kowalski stared at Evelyn, speechless. He had dealt with angry passengers, loud passengers, threatening passengers. He had never dealt with a quiet, surgical evisceration of his professionalism, his judgment, and his character by one of the sharpest legal minds in the country. Evelyn finally turned her attention to Diaz. Supervisor, I want your name, your employee number, and the employee number of Agent Kowalski. I want all security footage of this interaction preserved. I want a copy of every single protocol you believe he was following. My attorney David Chen will be in contact with the airport's general counsel within the hour. Agent Kowalski is not to have any contact with the public until this matter is fully investigated. Is that understood? Yes, Justice Smith? Absolutely, Diaz said, grabbing a pen with a shaking hand. Evelyn took the paper with their information, folded it once, and placed it in her pocket. She gave Kowalski one last lingering look of utter contempt. You didn't just break some art today, Mr. Kowalski. You violated the civil rights of a young woman under the color of authority, and you hurt my daughter. You will find that the latter offense carries consequences far beyond anything you can imagine. With that, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving a trail of profound silence and career-ending terror in her wake. She found Amara in the coffee shop, listlessly staring into a cup of tea. In her lap was the portfolio, looking like a battle-scarred casualty of war, with the snapped piece of board resting on top. Evelyn sat down, her face softening instantly. All the fury, the ice, the power melted away. She was just a mom again. She reached out and put her hand over Amara's. I'm here now, baby, she said softly. It's going to be okay. We're going to fix this. Amara looked up, her eyes red and swollen. You can't fix it, Mom. It's broken. The art is broken, Evelyn corrected gently. You are not, and that's what matters. But as she looked at the devastation in her daughter's face, Evelyn knew this was far from over. The reckoning had just begun. The drive back to their Georgetown home was a study in quiet solidarity. Amara sat in the passenger seat, the ruined portfolio held protectively in her lap, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery without really seeing it. Evelyn drove her hands steady on the wheel, her mind a whirlwind of controlled fury and tactical planning. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was heavy with unspoken pain and the looming shadow of the confrontation at the airport. When they walked through the door, Dr. Amara Smith was waiting. A tenured constitutional law professor at Georgetown University. Marcus was the family's anchor. Where Evelyn was sharp, precise, and often intense, Marcus was calm, expansive, and empathetic. He enveloped Amara in a hug, his large frame providing a sense of safety she desperately needed. "I heard," he said softly, looking over Amara's head at his wife. "David Chen called me. Are you okay, sweet pea?" Amara just shook her head, fresh tears spilling over as the sanctuary of home finally allowed her defenses to crumble. Marcus led her to the sofa, sitting with her, as she finally let the full weight of the day's violation wash over her. Evelyn watched them, a pang of something complex guilt, anger, helplessness twisting in her gut. She could argue before the highest court in the land, she could dissect complex legal statutes, but she couldn't undo the harm done to her child. Later that evening, after Amara had retreated to her room, the portfolio laid out on her floor, like a patient in critical condition. Evelyn and Marcus sat in their study. David Chen was on speakerphone. "The airport is in full panic mode," David said, his voice crisp and professional. "The director, a man named Peterson, has already reached out twice. Agent Kowalski has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation by the Office of Professional Responsibility. Supervisor Diaz is writing reports until her fingers fall off. They are terrified, Evelyn." "They should be," Evelyn said, pacing the room. "This wasn't just a mistake. It was malicious. I saw his face, David. He enjoyed it." "I don't doubt it," David replied. "Legally, we have a clear path for a civil suit. Bivens' claim for a Fourth Amendment violation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, destruction of property. We can make them pay, literally." Marcus cleared his throat. "And what does that look like for Amara? A long, drawn-out legal battle, depositions. Having to relive this over and over again in front of strangers." He looked at Evelyn. "Is that what she needs right now, or is that what you need?" The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Evelyn stopped pacing. He was right to ask. Her instinct, honed over decades as a prosecutor and judge, was to seek justice through punitive action, to hold the person accountable, to make an example of them, to ensure it never happened again. But Amara wasn't a case file. She was a shattered teenager. "What's the alternative?" Evelyn asked, her voice softer. "We just let it go." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We don't let it go. But we separate the institutional problem from Amara's personal healing. We need to focus on her first. Did you call RISD?" Evelyn had. She had spoken to the Dean of Admissions personally. She had explained in the most neutral terms she could manage that there had been an incident at airport security resulting in the catastrophic damage of her daughter's portfolio. The dean had been horrified and immediately granted a 2-week extension, offering to accept a digital submission of her other work along with high-resolution photos of the damaged triptych. "So that pressure is off," Marcus said. "Now we focus on the kid upstairs who feels like a part of her was amputated today." Meanwhile, in a suburban Virginia townhouse, Ron Kowalski was telling a very different version of the story to his union representative. "The whole thing is a crock," Kowalski insisted, nursing a beer. The girl was cagey from the start. The artwork looked like a damn bomb-making schematic. Wires, weird metallic stuff maps. I did my job. I followed procedure for a suspicious item. It's not my fault her mommy is some hotshot judge who thinks her kid's macaroni art is a national treasure. The union rep, a weary man named Frank, sighed. Did you document the threat indicators before the invasive search, Ron? I didn't have time to write a novel. The situation was dynamic. Did you damage the item before or after the chemical swab came back negative? Kowalski hesitated. It was all part of the same process of ensuring it was safe. Frank rubbed his temples. They have you on camera, Ron. They have a dozen witnesses, and they have a Supreme Court justice as the primary complainant. This isn't about whether you followed the letter of the law. It's about judgment. You picked a fight with a nuclear submarine. Kowalski slammed his beer down. So what, I'm supposed to let potential threats through because some rich kid might cry? This country's gotten soft. This is what's wrong with this place. I'm the victim here. They're trying to ruin my career because I did my job too well. He was starting to believe it himself. He wasn't a malicious actor. He was a patriot, a sheepdog protecting the flock from the wolves, even when the sheep were too stupid to see it. Back in Georgetown, the days that followed were filled with a heavy, oppressive quiet. Amara barely left her room. She wouldn't touch her art supplies. The vibrant, creative energy that usually filled her space was gone, replaced by a listless melancholy. She'd scroll through her phone, watch mindless videos, or just stare at the ceiling. The broken pieces of Anatomy of a Whisper sat on her desk, a constant, silent accusation. Evelyn tried to reach her, but it was like talking through thick glass. Her attempts to discuss legal strategy or airport accountability were met with shrugs. "I don't care, Mom," Amara would say, her voice flat. One evening, Evelyn found her daughter staring at the broken artwork. "We can sue him, Amara," Evelyn said softly. "We can make sure he never does this to anyone ever again." Amara finally looked at her, her eyes holding a depth of pain that startled Evelyn. "And then what? Will that fix it?" She pointed a trembling finger at the snapped board. "Will suing him put that back together? Will it make me forget how small and scared I felt? Will it make me want to draw again?" She shook her head, a bitter little smile on her lips. "You want justice, Mom. That's what you do. You put things in boxes, right, wrong, guilty, innocent. But this doesn't fit in a box. It's just broken. And I don't know what to do with it." Evelyn had no response. She could draft a legal opinion that would shape the nation, but she couldn't find the words to heal her own daughter. The silence stretched between them, a chasm that had been opened by a man in a TSA uniform, and widened by their different ways of processing the world. The official investigation was proceeding, but the most important thing, her daughter's spirit, remained in pieces. And Evelyn was beginning to fear that no court order, no settlement, no punishment could ever make it whole again. Just as a fragile routine began to settle over the Smith household, the storm broke. It didn't come from the TSA or the airport's legal department. It came from the churning, merciless vortex of the 24-hour news cycle. The headline appeared first on a fringe political blog known for its aggressive anti-establishment stance. "Exclusive Supreme Court's Iron Judge bullies TSA agent, uses power to intimidate federal worker." The article was a masterpiece of malicious framing. It used quotes likely leaked from Kowalski or his allies that painted Amara as a suspicious, uncooperative individual, and her art as bizarre and threatening. It portrayed Agent Kowalski as a dedicated public servant and a veteran who was simply doing his duty. The centerpiece of the article was an anonymous source, a colleague who witnessed the event, describing Justice Smith's arrival not as a concerned mother, but as an intimidating display of raw power. "She came in like a queen," the source was quoted as saying. "Didn't raise her voice, but she didn't have to. She was there to crush him, and everyone knew it. She basically threatened his career right there in the office. It was a gross abuse of her position." Within hours, the story was everywhere. Major cable news networks picked it up, eager for a controversy involving the Supreme Court. The narrative was dangerously compelling and easily digestible, a powerful unelected official using her immense influence to punish a working-class guy. The nuances were sanded away. Amara's age, the destruction of her property, the potential racial bias, all of it was relegated to footnotes, if mentioned at all. The public reaction was swift and brutal. On social media, justice for Kowalski began to trend. Memes appeared showing Evelyn in judicial robes wielding a gavel like a club. Commentators on TV debated the optics. Whether the agent was right or wrong is almost beside the point now. One pundit declared his face grave. The perception is that a Supreme Court justice who is supposed to be impartial intervened in a personal matter with the full weight of her office. This creates a crisis of confidence in the court itself. For Evelyn, it was a waking nightmare. Her public image, so carefully curated over decades, was being torched in real time. The leak was clearly intentional, designed not just to defend Kowalski, but to damage her. She was the court's crucial swing vote. An attack on her credibility was an attack on the court's ideological balance. The fallout was immediate. The Chief Justice, a man she respected immensely, requested a private meeting. He was gentle, but firm. "Evelyn, this has become a political circus," he said, his brow furrowed. "The integrity of the court must be our primary concern. I trust your judgment, but I urge you to let the official process play out, and to make no further public or private moves in this matter. You must be and must be seen to be above the fray." It was a warning wrapped in collegial advice. Her career, her legacy was now on the line. The cruelest blow, however, landed at home. Amara, already withdrawn, retreated even further. She saw the headlines on her phone, saw the vitriol directed at her mother, all because of her. One afternoon, Evelyn found her in her room, scrolling through comments on a news article. "Typical elite. Thinks the rules don't apply to her or her spoiled kid. That Kowalski guy is a hero. Probably stopped a terrorist. The art was probably some woke garbage anyway." Amara looked up, her face pale. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I shouldn't have called you." "No, don't you ever say that," Evelyn said fiercely, sitting beside her. "This is not your fault. This is their fault. They are twisting this, Amara. They are using us." "But they're using me to hurt you," Amara said, her voice cracking. "They're calling you a bully. They're questioning everything you've worked for. If I had just thrown the art away and gotten on the plane, none of this would be happening." The weight of that guilt was a heavier burden than the destroyed portfolio. She felt responsible for the public shaming of her mother, the woman she admired more than anyone. The incident at the airport had been a violation of her art and her identity. This media firestorm was a violation of her family's safety and her mother's reputation. That night, the tension in the house was palpable. Marcus was furious, fielding calls from concerned friends and outraged colleagues. Evelyn felt trapped. Every instinct told her to fight back, to release a statement, to have David Chen go on the offensive and expose the lies. But the Chief Justice's words echoed in her ears. Any move she made would be seen as confirmation of the accusations. She was a justice. She was supposed to be silent, impartial, a symbol of the law's majesty. But she was also a mother watching her family get torn apart in the public square. The twist was diabolically clever. Kowalski and his supporters hadn't just defended his actions. They had weaponized the truth of her intervention. Yes, she had shown up. Yes, she had been intimidating. Yes, she had used her identity to get their attention. She had done it to protect her child. But in the distorted mirror of public opinion, the act of a protective mother was being reflected back as the act of a tyrannical judge. And in this new battle, the law, her greatest weapon, was the one thing she was forbidden to use. The media onslaught felt personal, too personal to be a random defense of a single TSA agent. It was strategic, well-timed, and aimed directly at Evelyn's judicial credibility. This wasn't just a PR campaign. It was a character assassination. Evelyn Marcus and David Chen gathered in the Smiths' study, the room now a war room against an invisible enemy. "This leak isn't coming from the TSA's official channels," David said, pointing to a printout of the original blog post. "They're in damage control. They want this to go away. This is coming from the outside. Kowalski is a pawn, not the king." Marcus, hunched over his laptop, had been digging, not as a law professor, but as a husband and father with a deep understanding of the political ecosystems in Washington. "Evelyn, think about your recent cases, the ones that have drawn the most ire from the far right. What about Midwest Environmental Alliance, VEPA? Your swing vote upheld stricter emissions standards. The backlash from industry groups and their media surrogates was intense. Or the ACLU's Department of Homeland Security case." Evelyn mused, her mind clicking into analytical mode. "My concurring opinion argued for greater oversight on federal watch list criteria. It was not popular with the security above all crowd." "Exactly," David said. "Someone with an agenda against you saw an opportunity. Kowalski gets suspended, he's angry, he talks. Someone listens, sees the potential, and crafts a narrative. They feed it to a friendly blogger, and poof, instant firestorm." The task was to find the puppeteer. David engaged a discreet cybersecurity firm, one that specialized in tracing digital footprints. Meanwhile, Marcus used his academic network to dig into the fringe organizations that had been most critical of Evelyn's appointment. A breakthrough came 2 days later, not from a server log, but from an old-fashioned source, a disgruntled former employee. The cybersecurity firm found traces of communication between Kowalski and an online forum, a private message board for a group calling itself American Sentinel. The name rang a bell for Marcus. "American Sentinel," he said, pulling up a file on his computer. "It's a small but very loud constitutionalist advocacy group. They're funded by dark money primarily from industrialist benefactor Harrison Croft, who has major holdings in the fossil fuel sector. He was one of the biggest opponents of the Midwest environmental ruling. They've written 6 op-eds attacking you, Evelyn." The pieces were starting to fit. But the real smoking gun came from David's source, a former staffer at the blog that broke the story. For a price, and with a guarantee of absolute anonymity, the staffer was willing to talk. The meeting took place in a quiet corner of a DC pub. The ex-staffer, a nervous young man, explained how the story had landed on his desk. It wasn't just a tip from an angry TSA agent. It came as a fully formed package from a PR consultant named Jessica Thorne, who was on retainer for the American Sentinel Group. "Thorne delivered the whole thing," the source said, stirring his drink. The anonymous quotes the photo of Kowalski in his military dress uniform from 10 years ago, the angle about the elite judge. She even suggested the hashtag. Kowalski just had to agree to the story. He thought he was a hero. He had no idea he was just a trigger for a much bigger political hit. Jessica Thorne. The name was another jolt. Thorne was a notorious political operative known for her scorched earth tactics. She specialized in creating and amplifying outrage for political gain. She had found the perfect vessel in Ron Kowalski, a man whose own biases and grismiths could be easily molded into a weapon against her true target, Justice Evelyn Smith. The revelation was chilling. This wasn't a random event that got out of hand. It was a targeted political attack that had used Amara's trauma and Kowalski's prejudice as its raw materials. Amara hadn't just stumbled into the path of a rogue agent. She had stumbled into the crossfire of a political war aimed at her mother. Back in the study, the mood was grim. They had found the conspiracy. They could prove it. David Chen was practically vibrating with anticipation. "This is it," he said. "We can turn this whole thing around. We go public. We expose Jessica Thorne, American Sentinel Harrison Croft. We show how they manufactured this entire controversy to politically wound a sitting Supreme Court justice. We sue them for defamation, for tortious interference. We can destroy them." It was the perfect legal countermove. It would exonerate Evelyn, reframe the narrative, and expose the corrupt underbelly of political warfare. But Evelyn was quiet. She looked past the men, her gaze distant, focused on the hallway leading to Amara's room. Exposing the conspiracy meant putting Amara back in the spotlight. It meant her art, her pain, her face would be plastered across every news channel again this time as Exhibit A in a story about political intrigue. Her private trauma would become a public spectacle, a talking point in a cable news debate. Evelyn was faced with an impossible choice. She could fight for her reputation, her career, and for the principle of judicial integrity. She could take down the people who had orchestrated this attack using the full force of the legal system she represented. This was the path of the justice. Or she could shield her daughter from any further public trauma. She could absorb the political damage, weather the storm, and focus entirely on her family's healing, letting the conspirators believe they had won. This was the path of the mother. "Evelyn," Marcus asked gently, seeing the conflict raging in her eyes, "what do we do?" She looked at the evidence spread across her desk, the proof of a malicious plot, the key to her public vindication. Then she thought of Amara's voice whispering, "We'll suing him, put it back together." She realized then that winning in the court of public opinion might mean losing something far more precious. The twist wasn't just that there was a conspiracy, it was that exposing it might cause even greater harm than the conspiracy itself. The decision crystallized in Evelyn's mind, not with the cold logic of a legal ruling, but with the quiet clarity of a mother's heart. She looked at David, then at Marcus. "We do nothing," she said. David stared at her aghast. "Nothing, Evelyn. They tried to ruin you. We have them dead to rights." And what would getting them entail for Amara? Evelyn countered, her voice soft but unyielding. Her name, her face, her art, her pain, all dragged through the mud again as part of a political slugfest. She becomes a pawn in a game between me and Harrison Croft. I will not do that to her. She has been violated enough. Marcus reached across the desk and took her hand, a look of profound understanding on his face. "She's right, David." "So you're just going to let them get away with it?" David asked, incredulous. "They haven't gotten away with anything that truly matters," Evelyn said. "They've damaged my public approval rating. They've made my job more difficult for a season. But they haven't touched my family. Not really. My focus is inside these walls now, not outside." The decision was made. There would be no press conference, No lawsuit against American Sentinel, no grand exposé of Jessica Thorne. David Chen was instructed to continue handling the official TSA complaint quietly and formally, focusing only on Kowalski's direct actions and demanding departmental reform and a formal apology. The bigger political battle would go unfought. The following days were a test of Evelyn's resolve. The negative press continued to simmer. She endured the suspicious glances of colleagues and the thinly veiled barbs of political opponents. She held her head high, attended her sessions on the court, and did her job letting the storm rage around her without giving it any more fuel. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The true change happened not in the halls of justice, but in the quiet of Amara's bedroom. One evening, Evelyn knocked and entered to find Amara not staring at a screen, but sitting on the floor surrounded by art supplies, and in the center of the floor was the broken triptych. But she wasn't trying to glue it back together. She had taken the two main pieces of the snapped board and mounted them on a new, larger canvas, leaving a stark, jagged gap between them. She was using charcoal to draw dark, chaotic lines radiating out from the break like an energy blast. She was taking the smeared, yellowed chemical streaks left by Kowalski's swab and integrating them into the design, highlighting them with gold leaf, turning the stains of violation into something beautiful and deliberate. She was weaving the unspooled copper wire back into the composition not as a cage, but as a series of golden threads stitching the wound connecting the broken halves. She was not restoring the piece. She was transforming it. Evelyn watched mesmerized as her daughter worked with a focused intensity she hadn't seen in weeks. The piece was no longer just anatomy of a whisper. It was becoming something new. Darker, more painful, but also infinitely stronger and more profound. It was a testament not to what was lost, but to what had survived. Amara, Evelyn said softly. Amara looked up, her fingers smudged with charcoal. For the first time in a long time, her eyes weren't empty. They were alive with purpose. I couldn't fix it, Amara said, her voice steady. So I decided to tell the truth. It's part of the story now. The break. She pointed to the gap between the two pieces. That's the part that hurts, but it's also the part that's the most honest. In that moment, Evelyn understood. Justice for Amara was never going to be about punishing Ron Kowalski or winning a political war. Justice was this. It was the act of creation in the face of destruction. It was reclaiming her own narrative not by erasing the damage, but by making the damage part of the art. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It was a formal apology from the director of the TSA. It detailed the results of the internal investigation. Agent Kowalski's employment was terminated due to gross misconduct and failure to follow protocol. It outlined new mandatory training programs on handling sensitive and artistic materials. It was a quiet institutional victory. Evelyn read it and put it aside. The real victory was hanging on the wall of a gallery at the Rhode Island School of Design. Amara had been accepted into the summer program. Her submission was a photograph of her new transformed piece. The school had been so moved by the work and its story that they had requested the original for a student exhibition. She'd retitled it. It was now called Anatomy of a Reckoning. Evelyn and Marcus stood before it on opening night. It was the most powerful thing in the room. It radiated pain, resilience, and a fierce, defiant beauty. It was the story of everything they had been through. Amara stood beside them, no longer looking like a victim, but like an artist. He tried to silence you, Evelyn whispered, looking at the piece. And instead, he gave you a new voice. Amara smiled a genuine, radiant smile. "He didn't give it to me, Mom. I took it back." The family stood together, bathed in the gallery lights, looking at the testament to their ordeal. They had faced the ugliness of power, abused the chaos of public shaming, and the temptation of revenge. And they had chosen a different path. They had chosen healing over hatred art, over argument, and the quiet strength of family over the loud roar of public opinion. The world had tried to break them, but like Amara's art, they had refused to shatter. They had simply transformed the scars, becoming the most beautiful part of their story. What we just witnessed isn't just a drama. It's a reflection of a deeper truth. It's about how easily authority can be twisted by prejudice, and how a personal violation can be spun into a political weapon. Amara's story shows us that the loudest calls for justice aren't always the ones we need. Sometimes true strength isn't found in fighting back on your enemy's terms, but in reclaiming your own narrative. Her art became her victory, a powerful testament that you cannot destroy a person's spirit by breaking their belongings. She didn't just repair her art, she imbued it with her trauma and transformed it into a masterpiece of resilience. What do you think? Was Justice Smith right to back down from the political fight to protect her daughter, or should she have exposed the conspiracy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These are the complex conversations worth having. If this story moved you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates deep storytelling, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that explore the heart of the human condition. Thank you for listening.